Before we begin this incredible true story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another emotional journey like this one. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Henderson military base as hundreds of soldiers moved through their daily routines. The sound of boots marching in unison echoed across the parade ground. While drill sergeants barked commands that had been repeated for generations, this was a place of discipline, strength, and unwavering order. Every person here knew their role, followed their orders, and maintained the strict structure that military life demanded. Margaret Wilson stood at the main gate, her weathered hands clutching a small leather purse. She was 82 years old, with silver hair pulled back into a neat bun and deep lines etched into her face that told stories of a long life lived. Her floral dress seemed out of place among the camouflage uniforms and military vehicles that surrounded her. The young security guard at the gate looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and mild impatience. "I need to see your identification and know the purpose of your visit," the guard said, his tone professional but firm. Margaret nodded slowly and began searching through her purse with trembling fingers. The guard shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at the line of vehicles waiting behind this unexpected visitor. Military bases ran on schedules, and delays were not appreciated. Margaret finally pulled out a card from her purse. It was not a modern identification card with a photograph and barcode. Instead, it was an old, faded piece of cardboard that had clearly seen better days. The edges were worn and slightly torn. The colors had faded to pale versions of what they once were, and the lamination was peeling away in several places. The guard took the card from her hand, examining it with a confused expression. "Ma'am, this is not a valid form of identification," he began, but something on the card caught his eye. He looked closer, his expression changing from confusion to recognition, then to something that resembled disbelief. His face went pale as he read the text on the card, his fingers suddenly handling it with extreme care as if it were made of glass. "Please wait here, ma'am," he said, his voice now completely different from before. There was respect in his tone, mixed with something that sounded like awe. He quickly picked up his radio and spoke into it urgently. "I need an officer at the main gate immediately. This is priority." Margaret simply nodded and waited patiently, as if she had expected this reaction. She did not seem nervous or worried. Instead, there was a quiet dignity about her, a sense of purpose that had brought her to this place after so many years. The guard kept glancing at her and then back at the card in his hand, as if trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be possible. Within minutes, a captain arrived at the gate, jogging across the asphalt with quick, purposeful steps. The guard immediately handed him the card and spoke in a low, urgent voice. The captain's reaction mirrored the guard's. His eyes widened as he read the card, and he looked at Margaret with an expression that mixed surprise, respect, and deep curiosity. "Mrs. Wilson?" the captain asked gently. Margaret nodded. "Would you please come with me? I think there are many people here who need to meet you." He offered his arm to help her walk, and she accepted it with a grateful smile. As they began moving through the base, the captain radioed ahead. "Alert the commanding officer. We have a Gold Star mother at the gate carrying her son's card from 1968. The words Gold Star mother spread through the base like wildfire. Soldiers who overheard the radio transmission stopped what they were doing. Those words carried enormous weight in military culture. A Gold Star mother was someone who had lost a son or daughter in service to their country. It was a title no mother ever wanted, but one that commanded the deepest respect from every person who wore a uniform. As Margaret walked slowly through the base with the captain at her side, word continued to spread. Soldiers began emerging from buildings, workshops, and training areas. They lined the pathway without being ordered to do so, standing at attention as this elderly woman passed by. There were no commands given, no formal ceremony announced. Yet the entire base seemed to be coming to a standstill. Margaret walked steadily, her eyes straight ahead, that faded card now held carefully by the captain who walked beside her. She had not spoken much since arriving, but her presence alone was creating waves throughout Fort Henderson. Younger soldiers who had never seen combat stood alongside veterans who bore their own scars. All of them understood what it meant to see a Gold Star mother walking through their base. The commanding officer, Colonel James Morrison, was in the middle of reviewing training reports when his phone rang with the urgent news. He immediately put down everything and headed toward the main administration building where Margaret was being escorted. As a career military man with 30 years of service, Morrison had seen many things, but the arrival of a Gold Star mother, carrying her son's card from the Vietnam War era, was something that demanded his immediate attention and highest respect. Margaret was gently led into a conference room where she was offered water and a comfortable chair. More officers began arriving, each one showing visible emotion as they learned the reason for her visit. The room filled with a heavy, respectful silence. These were men and women trained to face danger without flinching. Yet the presence of an elderly woman holding a piece of faded cardboard had created a profound impact that no amount of training could prepare them for. Colonel Morrison entered the room and immediately approached Margaret. He did not offer a handshake. Instead, he stood at attention and gave her a crisp salute. "Mrs. Wilson, it is an honor to have you here. Would you be willing to tell us about your son?" His voice was steady but filled with genuine emotion. Margaret looked up at him with eyes that held decades of memory, pain, and enduring love. "His name was Thomas," she began, her voice soft but clear. "Thomas Andrew Wilson. He was 19 years old when he enlisted. He did not have to go. He could have stayed home, gone to college, lived a safe life. But Tommy always believed in serving something bigger than himself. Even as a little boy, he would help neighbors carry their groceries, shovel snow from elderly people's driveways without being asked, and stand up for kids who were being bullied at school." The room remained absolutely silent as Margaret spoke. Every person present gave her their complete attention. Outside, word had spread further, and soldiers were gathering near the building, standing quietly, waiting to hear more about the woman who had brought the base to a halt with a single faded card. "When Tommy told me he was enlisting, I was terrified," Margaret continued, her hands folding the edge of her dress. "It was 1967, and we all knew what was happening in Vietnam. Young men were coming home in caskets. Mothers were receiving folded flags and heartbreaking news. But Tommy looked at me with those determined eyes and said, 'Mom, if I do not go, someone else will have to go in my place. Someone else's mother will worry. I can do this.'" Margaret paused, taking a slow breath before continuing. "He left for basic training in the spring of 1968. I remember standing on the platform at the train station, watching him wave from the window. He had the biggest smile on his face, so proud in his new uniform. That was the last time I saw him smile in person. He wrote letters home every week without fail. He told me about his training, his fellow soldiers, the places he saw. He never complained. He never expressed fear, though I know he must have felt it." Colonel Morrison listened intently, his jaw tight with emotion. Several younger officers in the room were hearing firsthand what it meant to serve, not just from a soldier's perspective, but from the mother who sent him. Margaret's words were painting a picture that no training manual or history book could capture. This was the human cost of service, told by someone who had paid the ultimate price. "Tommy was deployed to Vietnam in August of 1968, Margaret said, her voice wavering slightly now. "His letters changed after that. They became shorter, more careful. He did not want to worry me, but I could read between the lines. I could tell he was seeing terrible things. He was in a place where young men were dying around him, where the heat and jungle and enemy fire created hell on earth. But he still wrote. He still told me he was doing important work. He still said he was proud to serve." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small stack of letters, yellowed with age and tied together with a faded ribbon. "I kept every letter he sent. 73 letters in total. I have read each one hundreds of times. I know every word by heart." In his last letter, dated October 14th, 1968, he wrote about his squad. He said they were like brothers. He said they looked out for each other. He said he hoped to be home by Christmas. Margaret's voice broke on the last word, and several people in the room visibly struggled to maintain their composure. A female lieutenant standing near the back of the room wiped tears from her eyes. Even the most hardened veterans in the room felt the weight of what this mother had carried for more than 50 years. "Tommy died on October 22, 1968, Margaret said quietly. His convoy was ambushed. He was helping pull another wounded soldier to safety when he was shot. He died doing exactly what he always did, putting others before himself. He was 19 years old. He never got to come home for Christmas. He never got to live the life he deserved." The silence in the room was absolute. Outside, the gathering crowd of soldiers stood motionless, somehow sensing the gravity of what was happening inside the building. The card that Margaret had shown at the gate now sat on the table in front of Colonel Morrison. It was a military-dependent identification card from 1968, issued to Margaret Wilson as the mother of Private Thomas Andrew Wilson. The card had been her connection to her son during his service, her proof that she was the mother of a soldier. Now, it was a relic from another time. It's a physical reminder of a sacrifice that could never be undone. Colonel Morrison looked at the card and then at Margaret. "Mrs. Wilson, what brings you here today, after all these years?" he asked gently. Margaret took a moment to compose herself, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she had pulled from her purse. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, filled with purpose. "I am here because of something Tommy wrote in one of his letters," she said. "He told me that if anything happened to him, he wanted me to know that his service mattered. He wanted me to remember that he believed in what he was doing. For many years after he died, I was consumed by grief. I was angry at the war. I'm angry at the decisions that sent young men like Tommy to fight in a distant jungle. Angry at a world that could be so cruel." She looked around the room at the faces watching her. "But as the years passed, I began to understand what Tommy was trying to tell me. He chose to serve. He chose to stand up when his country called. He chose to protect his fellow soldiers, even when it cost him his life. That choice, that sacrifice, had meaning. And I realized that I needed to honor that meaning, not just with my grief, but with my presence." Margaret reached back into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter I wrote but never sent. I wrote it to the commanding officer of Tommy's unit. But by the time I finished writing it, the war was over and the unit had disbanded. I kept this letter for 57 years, waiting for the right moment to deliver its message. Today feels like that moment." Ash! Colonel Morrison took the letter carefully, as if it were a sacred document. He unfolded it slowly and began to read aloud so everyone in the room could hear. The letter was dated December 1968, written just 2 months after Tommy's death. In it, Margaret had written about her son, about his character, about his dreams, and about her gratitude to the soldiers who had served alongside him. She had written about the pain of losing him, but also about her pride in his choice to serve. The final paragraph of the letter struck everyone in the room with particular force. Margaret had written, "To every soldier who serves, who sacrifices, who faces danger for the sake of others, please know that you carry the hopes of mothers like me. We send our children into your ranks, trusting that their service will have meaning, that their sacrifice will not be forgotten. Tommy believed in something greater than himself, and I believe in honoring that belief by supporting those who continue to serve." When Colonel Morrison finished reading, there was not a dry eye in the room. The message from a grieving mother written more than half a century ago resonated with everyone present. It transcended time, politics, and individual opinions about any particular conflict. It spoke to the fundamental human truth at the heart of military service. Real people make real sacrifices, and those sacrifices deserve recognition and respect. "Mrs. Wilson," Colonel Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion, "your son's service absolutely mattered. It mattered then, and it matters now. Every person on this base understands that the freedom and safety we work to protect comes at a cost. That cost is measured in lives like Tommy's, in sacrifices made by soldiers and borne by families like yours. We will never forget that." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I also came here for another reason," she said. "I came to deliver something to the soldiers of today. I want them to know that when they put on that uniform, they carry the legacy of young men and women like Tommy. They carry the trust of parents who worry every day. They carry the responsibility of making their service meaningful. She reached into her purse one final time and pulled out a small box. Inside was a medal, Tommy's Bronze Star, awarded posthumously for his heroic actions in saving his fellow soldier. She had kept it in a place of honor in her home for decades. "I want to donate this to the base museum," she said. "I want it displayed alongside the stories of other fallen soldiers so that visitors, especially young people considering military service, can see what real courage looks like." Tommy would want his story to inspire others, not to glorify war, but to honor the choice to serve with dignity and purpose. Colonel Morrison accepted the medal with both hands, holding it as carefully as one would hold a newborn child. "Mrs. Wilson, this is an incredible gift. We will create a special display in Tommy's honor. His story will be told with the respect and reverence it deserves. I promise you that every soldier who passes through this base will learn about Private Thomas Andrew Wilson and the mother who loved him enough to share his memory with the world." Word of what was happening inside the conference room had spread throughout the entire base. What had started as a few curious soldiers gathering outside had grown into hundreds of service members standing in formation without being ordered to do so. They stood in the autumn sun, waiting quietly for the chance to honor a Gold Star mother and the son she had lost so many decades ago. Young recruits stood beside seasoned officers. All united by a common understanding of what Margaret's visit represented, Colonel Morrison made a decision in that moment that would become part of Fort Henderson's history. He spoke quietly to his senior officers, and within minutes, an announcement went out over the base's public address system. All personnel not involved in critical operations are to report to the main parade ground immediately for a special ceremony. This is not a drill. This is a moment of honor. Margaret was gently escorted from the conference room, with Colonel Morrison on one side and the captain who had first recognized the significance of her card on the other. As she stepped outside, she gasped softly. The sight before her was overwhelming. Hundreds of soldiers stood in perfect formation across the parade ground. They were standing at attention, absolutely silent, their eyes forward, but their hearts clearly focused on the elderly woman who had brought them all together. A path had been created through the center of the formation, leading to a raised platform where ceremonies were typically held. Margaret walked slowly along this path, her eyes taking in the sea of uniforms surrounding her. Some of the soldiers were young enough to be her great-grandchildren. Others were older, possibly veterans of more recent conflicts. All of them shared one thing. They understood what she had given and what her son had sacrificed. As Margaret reached the platform, Colonel Morrison helped her up the steps. He positioned her at the center, facing the assembled soldiers. Then he turned to address the formation. His voice carried across the parade ground, strong and clear, but filled with emotion that was impossible to hide. "Today, we have been honored by a visit from Mrs. Margaret Wilson, a Gold Star mother whose son, Private Thomas Andrew Wilson, gave his life in service to our nation on October 22nd, 1968. In Vietnam, Mrs. Wilson has carried her son's memory with dignity and grace for 57 years. She has come here today to share his story with us and to remind us of the sacred responsibility we all carry when we put on this uniform." The colonel paused, letting his words sink in. Private Wilson was 19 years old when he died. He was helping save a fellow soldier when he was killed. He made a choice that day, just as he made a choice when he enlisted. He chose to serve. He chose to sacrifice. He chose to protect others at the cost of his own life. That choice is the foundation of everything we do here. That choice is why we train, why we serve, why we stand ready to answer our nation's call. Colonel Morrison turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Wilson has entrusted us with her son's Bronze Star medal and has asked that we display it in our museum so that future generations will know about Private Wilson's courage. But more importantly, she has given us something that no medal can represent. She has given us her presence, her story, and her son's memory. These gifts remind us that we are not just soldiers. We are sons and daughters, brothers and sisters. We are people trusted by families like the Wilsons to serve with honor." The colonel then did something that surprised everyone. including Margaret. He turned to face her directly, and speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, said, "Mrs. Wilson, on behalf of the United States Army and every person standing on this parade ground today, I want to thank you. Thank you for raising a son who believed in service. Thank you for supporting his choice to join the military. Thank you for carrying your grief with dignity for more than 5 decades. And thank you for coming here today to remind us why our service matters." Then Colonel Morrison saluted her. It was not a quick, perfunctory salute. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with profound respect. Margaret, who had only seen such salutes in old photographs and military funerals, felt tears streaming down her face. But something remarkable happened next. Every single soldier on that parade ground, without being ordered to do so, raised their hands in salute. Hundreds of service members standing in the afternoon sun, saluting an 82-year-old woman who represented every military mother who had ever sent a child to war. The silence was broken by a sound that sent chills through everyone present. From somewhere in the formation, one soldier began to clap. Then another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire parade ground erupted in applause. It was not the polite applause of a formal ceremony. It was genuine, heartfelt, and overwhelming. It was the sound of hundreds of people expressing gratitude, respect, and recognition for a sacrifice they all understood, but hoped they would never have to ask their own families to make. Margaret stood on that platform, tears flowing freely, her hand over her heart. She had come to Fort Henderson hoping to share her son's story with a few people. Perhaps leave his medal in a display case where it might occasionally be noticed. She had never imagined this. She had never imagined that her son's memory would be honored by hundreds of soldiers, that his story would move an entire military base to stop their work and gather in respect. When the applause finally subsided, Margaret stepped forward to the microphone that had been placed on the platform. Her voice was soft at first, wavering with emotion, but it grew stronger as she spoke. "My son Tommy would be so proud to see all of you today. He loved being a soldier. He loved the sense of purpose it gave him. He loved knowing that his service mattered. When I look at all of you, I see Tommy. I see the same commitment, the same willingness to serve, the same courage that he showed." Margaret continued speaking, her voice carrying across the silent parade ground. "I want you all to know something important. Your families worry about you every single day. Your mothers lie awake at night thinking about you. Your fathers put on brave faces but feel fear in their hearts. Your brothers and sisters miss you. Your children count the days until you come home. You carry their love with you every day, even when you are far from home, even when you face danger." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "But your families are also proud of you. They are proud that you chose to serve. They are proud of your courage. They are proud of the person you become through your service. When I lost Tommy, I was shattered. I thought I would never recover from that grief. But over time, I realized that my grief was matched by my pride. I was, and still am, so incredibly proud that Tommy chose to serve. I am proud that he faced his fears. I am proud that he died trying to save someone else." A young female soldier in the front row was openly crying now, and she was not alone. Throughout the formation, hardened warriors were wiping their eyes, their throats tight with emotion. Margaret's words were reaching into a place that military training never touched, the vulnerable human heart that existed beneath every uniform. "I also want to tell you something that Tommy wrote in one of his letters," Margaret said. "He told me that he had learned something important in the military. He said he learned that when you serve alongside others, you depend on them and they depend on you, you discover what really matters in life. It is not money or fame or comfort. What matters is being there for others when they need you most. What matters is being someone others can count on. What matters is choosing to do what is right even when it is hard or scary." Margaret's hands gripped the edges of the podium. Tommy's life was cut short, but the lessons he learned and the person he became during his service have lived on through me. I have spent the past 57 years trying to live by the values he discovered. I have tried to be there for others. I have tried to serve my community. I have tried to honor his memory, not just with grief, but with action. She looked directly at Colonel Morrison. "When I decided to come here today, I was not sure what to expect. I thought maybe I would meet a few officers, leave Tommy's medal, and go home. But what has happened here today is beyond anything I could have imagined. You have all honored my son in a way that fills my heart with joy. You have shown me that his sacrifice was not forgotten, that his story still matters, that his choice to serve was meaningful." Margaret then addressed the soldiers again. "I am an old woman now. I do not have many years left, but I will spend whatever time I have left telling people about all of you. I will tell them about the dedication I saw here today. I will tell them about the respect you showed to a grieving mother. I will tell them that the military is not just about weapons and wars. It is about people who choose to serve something bigger than themselves." Colonel Morrison stepped forward again as Margaret finished speaking. "Mrs. Wilson, your presence here today has given all of us a precious gift. You have reminded us why we serve. You have connected us to the generations of soldiers who came before us. You have honored your son's memory in the most powerful way possible by sharing his story and ensuring that it continues to inspire others. Private Thomas Andrew Wilson died in 1968, but his spirit lives on in every person standing here today. His choice to serve, his courage in the face of danger, his willingness to put others before himself, these are the values that define us as soldiers. We honor his memory by living up to those values every single day." The colonel then made an announcement that surprised everyone. Effective immediately, the training center on the west side of the base will be renamed the Private Thomas Andrew Wilson Leadership Center. Every soldier who goes through training here will learn about Private Wilson's story. They will learn about the sacrifice he made and the mother who honored his memory. They will understand that being a soldier is not just about skills and tactics. It is about character, courage, and commitment. A cheer erupted from the formation. Soldiers clapped and voiced their approval. Margaret covered her mouth with her hands, overwhelmed by this unexpected honor. Her son's name would live on in this place. Young soldiers would walk past his name every day, and some of them would ask about his story. His memory would continue to inspire people decades after his death, as the ceremony continued. Several soldiers approached Margaret with their own stories. A young sergeant talked about losing his brother in Afghanistan and how Margaret's strength gave him hope for his own mother's healing. An older veteran spoke about serving in Vietnam and remembered the young soldiers like Tommy who never made it home. A female officer shared that she had joined the military because of her grandfather's stories of service and that Margaret's visit reminded her why that legacy mattered. Margaret listened to each story with genuine interest and compassion. She hugged soldiers who needed comfort. She thanked them for their service. She told them that their families were proud of them. In doing so, she became more than just Tommy's mother. She became a symbol of every military family that had ever sent a loved one into danger. She became a bridge between those who served and those who waited at home, praying for their safe return. The afternoon sun was beginning to set by the time the ceremony concluded. Margaret was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but there was a light in her eyes that had not been there in years. She had carried her grief alone for so long, visiting Tommy's grave every week, keeping his letters in a special box, looking at his photograph every morning. Now she had shared that grief with hundreds of people who understood it. She had transformed her personal pain into a collective moment of remembrance and honor. As Margaret prepared to leave Fort Henderson, Colonel Morrison walked with her back to the main gate. The base had returned to its normal operations, but something had fundamentally changed. Every soldier who had been present at that ceremony would carry the memory of this day for the rest of their lives. They had witnessed something rare and powerful, a direct connection to the human cost of military service. "Mrs. Wilson," the colonel said as they walked slowly, "I want you to know that what happened here today will have lasting impact. Your son's story will be told to every new recruit who comes through our training center. His bronze star will be displayed prominently in our museum, along with the story of his heroism. But more than that, you have given us something invaluable. You have reminded us that behind every uniform is a person, and behind every person is a family that loves them."
Oh.
Margaret smiled, squeezing his arm gently. Tommy would be so happy to know that his story could help others. He was always looking for ways to make a difference. I think this would mean more to him than any medal ever could. They reached the main gate where Margaret had first arrived hours earlier. The young security guard who had first seen her faded identification card was still on duty. When he saw her approaching, he immediately stood at attention and saluted. "Ma'am, it has been an honor," the guard said, his voice sincere. Margaret stopped and looked at him with kind eyes. "Young man, what is your name?" she asked. "Private Jackson, ma'am," he replied. "Private Jackson, thank you for recognizing the importance of an old card and an old woman. You could have turned me away, but you chose to pay attention. That attention led to something beautiful today. Never underestimate the power of showing respect and taking time to understand people's stories." The guard nodded, visibly moved by her words. "Ma'am, my grandmother is a Gold Star mother too. She lost her son, my uncle, in Iraq. When I saw your card and realized what it meant, I thought about her and all the pain she has carried. I wanted to make sure you were treated with the respect you deserve." Margaret reached out and patted his hand. "Then you understand. Tell your grandmother that there are people who remember, who honor the sacrifice, who will never forget." Colonel Morrison had arranged for a military vehicle to drive Margaret home. As she settled into the back seat, she looked out at the base one more time. Soldiers were going about their duties. Training exercises were resuming. The machinery of military life was continuing. But she knew that beneath that surface, something had shifted. Her visit had created ripples that would spread far beyond this single day. The drive home gave Margaret time to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the moment she had decided to make this visit. How nervous she had been, how uncertain about whether it was the right thing to do. She had worried that people would not care about a soldier who died so long ago, and his story would seem irrelevant to modern military personnel. But she had been so wrong. The response had been overwhelming, beautiful, healing. When Margaret arrived home, her daughter Sarah was waiting anxiously at the door. Sarah had tried to talk her mother out of making this trip, worried that it would be too emotionally difficult, that dredging up old pain would be harmful. "Mom, how did it go?" Sarah asked, searching her mother's face for signs of distress. Margaret smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It was perfect," she said simply. "Your brother was honored today in a way I never could have imagined." Over the following weeks, Margaret received letters from soldiers who had been present at the ceremony. They wrote about how her visit had impacted them, how Private Wilson's story had inspired them to be better soldiers and better people. Some shared their own family stories of military service. Others simply thanked her for her sacrifice and her willingness to share her grief publicly. Each letter was carefully read and treasured. The local newspaper heard about Margaret's visit to Fort Henderson and ran a story about it. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. Soon, Margaret was receiving interview requests from across the country. She agreed to a few, always using the opportunity to talk not just about Tommy, but about all Gold Star families. She spoke about the importance of honoring military service, supporting veterans, and remembering that behind every casualty statistic was a real person with dreams and family and potential. 3 months after her visit to Fort Henderson, Margaret received an invitation to return to the base for the dedication ceremony of the Private Thomas Andrew Wilson Leadership Center. She accepted immediately. This time, Sarah insisted on coming with her, wanting to see where her brother was being honored. They arrived on a cold December morning, almost exactly 57 years after Tommy's death. The new Leadership Center was beautiful. It was a modern building with large windows and state-of-the-art training facilities. But the most striking feature was the entrance. There, carved in stone, was Tommy's name, his dates of service. In a quote from one of his letters that Margaret had shared, "Service means being there for others when they need you most." Below the quote was a bronze plaque with Tommy's photograph. Looking young and proud in his uniform, smiling the smile that Margaret remembered so well, inside the building, a permanent exhibit had been created telling Tommy's story. His bronze star was displayed in a case of honor, along with photographs, excerpts from his letters, and information about the Vietnam War. But the exhibit also included Margaret's story. It talked about her visit to the base, about the ceremony that had honored her, and about the importance of Gold Star families in military culture. Visitors to the Leadership Center would learn about both the soldier and the mother, who kept his memory alive. During the dedication ceremony, Colonel Morrison spoke again about the impact of Margaret's visit. When Mrs. Wilson walked through our gate carrying her son's identification card, she brought with her 57 years of love, grief, and pride. She reminded us that military service is not an abstract concept. It is real people making real sacrifices. This Leadership Center will stand as a permanent reminder of Private Wilson's courage and his mother's dedication to honoring his memory. Margaret was asked to say a few words at the ceremony. She stood before another gathering of soldiers, but this time she felt less nervous. She had learned that her story mattered, that sharing Tommy's memory was not self-indulgent grief, but rather an important act of remembrance that served a larger purpose. This building bears my son's name, but it represents every soldier who has ever served. It represents every family that has supported their loved ones in uniform. It represents the values that make military service meaningful: courage, sacrifice, dedication, and love of others. She looked at the young faces in the audience. Tommy never got to grow old. He never got to have a career, get married, have children, or live a full life. But through this building, through the soldiers who will train here, through the values that will be taught here, Tommy's spirit will live on. Every person who walks through these doors will carry a piece of his legacy with them. That is more than I ever dreamed possible when I decided to visit this base with an old, faded card. As the ceremony concluded and people gathered for refreshments, Margaret found herself surrounded by soldiers once again. But this time, some of them brought their own family members. Mothers and fathers of current service members approached her. Wanting to meet the woman whose story had touched so many hearts, they shared their own fears and pride about having children in the military. Margaret listened to each one, offering comfort and understanding that could only come from someone who had walked that difficult path. One young mother approached with tears in her eyes, holding the hand of a small boy. "Mrs. Wilson, my husband is deployed overseas right now. Some days the fear is overwhelming, but your story gives me strength. It reminds me that no matter what happens, his service matters. Our sacrifice as a family matters." Margaret embraced the woman, feeling the trembling in her shoulders. "Your husband is serving with honor, just like my Tommy did. And you are serving too by keeping your family strong while he is away. Never forget that." The months following the dedication ceremony brought more changes to Margaret's life. She was invited to speak at other military bases, at veterans events, and at schools. She accepted as many invitations as her health would allow. Each time she spoke, she emphasized the same themes: the importance of honoring service, the need to support military families, and the power of remembering those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Margaret also began working with a Gold Star Families organization, helping other parents who had lost children in military service. She understood their pain in a way few others could. She knew the weight of an empty chair at holiday dinners, the sound of silence where a beloved voice used to be, the ache of seeing other mothers with their adult children and knowing she would never have that experience. She offered these grieving parents something precious: hope that their pain could transform into purpose, that their children's memories could inspire others. On what would have been Tommy's 77th birthday, Margaret visited his grave as she did every year, but this time felt different. She brought with her photographs from the Leadership Center dedication, showing Tommy's name carved in stone, his bronze star on display, his story being told to new generations of soldiers. She placed the photographs against his headstone and spoke to him as she always did. "Tommy, I did it. I made sure your story would live on. I made sure people would know who you were, what you believed in, and why your service mattered. The base has a building with your name on it now. Can you believe that? My boy, who used to climb trees and catch frogs and dream about being a hero, you have become exactly that. Not because of how you died, but because of how you lived and what you stood for." She traced his name on the headstone with her fingers, a gesture she had repeated thousands of times over the decades. "I miss you every single day. I wonder what you would look like now, what your voice would sound like, what advice you would give me. But I am not as sad as I used to be. Your memory has given me purpose. Sharing your story has connected me to so many wonderful people. You would be proud of what your legacy has become. Margaret lived for 3 more years after the dedication of the Leadership Center. During that time, she continued to speak, to write letters to soldiers, and to support Gold Star families. She became known throughout the military community as a symbol of strength, grace, and enduring love. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 85, military honors were given at her funeral. Soldiers from Fort Henderson served as pallbearers, and Colonel Morrison, now retired, delivered a eulogy. Margaret Wilson was not a soldier, but she served her country as surely as any person who wore a uniform, Morrison said at her funeral. She served by raising a son who believed in something greater than himself. She served by honoring his memory with dignity for nearly 6 decades. She served by reminding all of us why military service matters and why we must never forget those who sacrifice. She will be buried next to her son Tommy, and together they represent the best of what it means to serve and to love. The story of Margaret Wilson and her son Tommy did not end with their deaths. The Leadership Center at Fort Henderson continued to train soldiers, and every one of them learned about Private Wilson's heroism and his mother's devotion. New exhibits were added over time, including letters from soldiers who had been inspired by Tommy's story, testimonials from people Margaret had helped, and historical context about the Vietnam War and the Gold Star families who bore its cost. Years later, a young recruit named David Martinez went through training at the Leadership Center. He spent time in the exhibit hall, reading Tommy's letters and looking at the photographs of Margaret. David had been uncertain about his decision to join the military, wondering if it was the right choice, questioning whether he had what it took to be a soldier. But Tommy's story moved him deeply. David read one letter in particular over and over. It was the one where Tommy wrote about learning that what mattered in life was being there for others when they needed you most. That simple truth resonated with David in a profound way. He realized that this was exactly why he had joined the military. To be someone others could count on, to serve something bigger than himself. Tommy's words, written more than 60 years earlier, had reached across time to inspire someone who had not even been born when Tommy died. David went on to have a distinguished military career. He faced combat, earned promotions, and eventually became an officer. Throughout his service, he carried a small laminated copy of Tommy's photograph and quote with him. When younger soldiers asked him about it, he would tell them Tommy's story and Margaret's story. He would explain that they were part of a legacy stretching back generations, that their service connected them to every soldier who had come before. The ripple effects of Margaret's decision to visit Fort Henderson with her faded identification card continued to spread in ways she never could have predicted. Documentary filmmakers made a short film about her story. Authors included her visit in books about military culture and Gold Star families. Teachers used Tommy's letters in history classes to help students understand the human dimension of war. Every retelling of the story reminded people that behind every military statistic was a real person with a family who loved them. The faded card that Margaret had carried to Fort Henderson that autumn day was eventually donated to the Smithsonian Institution. It became part of a permanent exhibit about military families. Next to the card was the full story of Margaret's visit, photographs from the ceremony, and information about the Leadership Center named in Tommy's honor. Museum visitors from around the world stopped to read about this mother and son, and many left the exhibit with tears in their eyes and a deeper appreciation for military service. Tommy Wilson had been one soldier among thousands who died in Vietnam. His death could have been just another tragic statistic in a controversial war. But because of his mother's courage in sharing his story, because of her refusal to let his memory fade into obscurity, Tommy's life and sacrifice took on larger meaning. He became a symbol of all young people who choose to serve, all families who support them, all communities that must remember the cost of freedom. Margaret's simple act of walking through a military base gate with an old card had created something extraordinary. It had brought an entire base to silence, inspired thousands of soldiers, created a lasting memorial, and reminded a nation of the real meaning behind military service. Her love for her son, carried faithfully for nearly 60 years, had transformed personal grief into collective remembrance and individual sacrifice into universal inspiration. The story teaches us that every life matters. Every sacrifice deserves recognition, and every memory has power when shared with purpose and love. Tommy and Margaret Wilson, soldier and mother, left a legacy that will continue inspiring people for generations to come. Their story reminds us that the greatest acts of service come in many forms. From the young soldier who gives his life for others, to the mother who ensures that gift is never forgotten.